Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are into the 37th lecture of this course. We have discussed many aspects of this course, and by this time you must be very clear about the importance of this course and the way we have proceeded, the concept of research, its methodologies, its techniques, and of course various designs and other aspects that we have been discussing must reflect its importance of this subject. Today we are going to discuss the types of data. We listen about the data so frequently. So first, what is data? Because the scientific research is based on data, is based on facts, is based on evidence. So if a person claims that women participation in Indian elections or the Iranian elections or the Kuwaiti elections or the Jordanian elections has increased, then we have to give the evidence from the data. The data about various aspects of participation of women in these elections is available with the Election Commission, which is of course a very reliable source. And from those data we can support our argument that women participation has increased in the election of one or the other countries. If we claim that India's exports to say Gulf countries has increased, then of course we have the reliable data from the Ministry of Commerce giving all the details about the Indian exports to the Gulf countries. So if we claim that India's exports to these countries has increased, then of course we have to suffice it with the data available, with the data given by the Ministry of Commerce regarding India's exports to those countries. So what is data? Again it is there. So data is information collected, observed or generated for analysis and decision making. Sometimes we collect the data from observation. At times we collect the data from the published sources, and at times we generate data from the various kind of census or sample surveys. And so this data is the information collected from the ground, collected about the phenomenon from where it happens, and then we find that our proposition our hypothesis, our statement regarding the phenomenon is supported by the information on the ground by or not. And this information that is collected or generated or observed is termed as data. So, data has its own very crucial importance to the research, and the scientific research, as we have discussed in the previous lectures also, is so crucial for the scientific research. Therefore, today's lecture is devoted to the data and types of data. It is clear to us what is data now. We have to get information about India's trade with USA, India's trade with China. We collect this data from the reliable source, which is Ministry of Commerce. We want to get data about women's participation in election. We have a reliable source in Election Commission. We gather or collect data from there. We want to collect the data about migratory birds. We collect the data by observing it. We want to collect the data about beggars. So, we do collect the data by observation. Similarly, we want to collect the data about the efficacy of a medicine, of a vaccine, which is utilized for vaccination. So, this vaccine, to prove the efficacy of this vaccine or this medicine, one has to generate the data through the experimental method. Or if somebody has to study the impact of fertilizer or the impact of various kind of fertilizers on productivity, then also data has to be generated. So, data is the information, basic information collected from the ground about the phenomenon or observed from the ground about the phenomenon or generated about the phenomenon. So, this information is termed as data. Now, the data can take different forms depending on how it is collected, structured and interpreted. We have the list of various types of data here, which is primary data, secondary data, time series data, cross-sectional data, panel data, qualitative data and quantitative data. This is the broad classification, which include almost all types of the data. So, we shall be discussing one by one these various types of data, which should be very clear in our minds. So, the first is the primary data. Primary data is the data which is collected first hand by researchers specifically for their study. A study of the project, a study of the problem that they have been assigned. The examples include surveys, interviews, experiments, and direct observations. This data type is directly tailored to the research question, allowing control over the data collection process, though it is often time consuming and costly. So, we have this is the primary data. Suppose we are studying the satisfaction level of students from teaching in a department. Here, one has to go for the primary data because we cannot afford to have the secondary data here, even if number one, the secondary data will not be available, and if somebody has done earlier, then also his data cannot be taken because it becomes secondary, and also it will not be appropriate to do the research today on a data which was generated say 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 1 year ago, even 1 year ago. So, this primary data is the data which has been collected for the first time and specifically for that study of that problem which we have undertaken, which a researcher is working upon. This data is tailored according to the research question, because there is no which kind of data to be collected is determined by the type of or the kind of research, kind of the problem of research, and this is why the primary data will only suffice to many kind of researches. The details we shall be further dealing with. The secondary data refers to the data initially collected by others but used by researchers for new analysis or perspectives. Examples include census data, government reports, previously conducted surveys, and organizational records. Secondary data is cost effective and readily available, providing a rich resource for various analyses, though it may not perfectly align with the new research question and researchers have limited control over its quality. So, in secondary data, it has been collected by any other individual, agency, ministry or organization, not by the researcher. He has only to collect it. The data has already been generated and processed by some agency or individual or say an organization for the purpose of information which can be used for the various kind of researches. And also this data can be used by for any problem that is suitable for this that require such kind of data, and the data is suitable for the kind of type of research which the researcher is pursuing. So, that is the difference. Primary data is collected by the researcher or researchers themselves for the project or for the problem of research that they are working upon. Whereas the secondary data is collected by some others where the data is utilized by the researchers. Why this? Because there are problems. There are problems in which we cannot use primary data, and there are problems or issues in which we cannot use secondary data. If we are working on the popularity of a political leader or performance of a public representative or the satisfaction level of students from the teaching in the department, if it is so, the data has to have primary data. From where we get the data about satisfaction level of students? Even if the data is available, it is not suitable to be used for the studies today. Or if we are working on the popularity of a political leader or the performance of a public representative, then also the primary data is the only data which is usable in such types of researches, such types of problem of the research. However, if the problem is of working on, say, India's trade with, say, China, or India's trade with USA, or India's trade with Saudi Arabia, then what we have to do? We cannot stand upon all ports and airports from where the exportations and importation take place, and that also for all the period of study. It is impossible task. It cannot be done simply whatever the budget. That if we are working on, say, India's trade relation with Saudi Arabia between 2005 and 2020, then for these 15 years, how the researcher and his surveyors can locate, can note down all the exportations and importations all through these 15 years, which has been taking place with Saudi Arabia. It is simply impossible. Therefore, in such kind of situation, there is no alternative but to go for a secondary data. If suppose we are working on, say, women's participation in the Iranian elections or the Jordanian or Kuwaiti elections or, say, Indian elections, then the researcher, it is impossible to collect data from all the polling booths himself or herself or along with the surveyors, because we require a large army of researchers and surveyors, which all of course be not possible, and that also in various periods. So here also we have to in fact depend upon the secondary data. The so it depends upon the nature and type of the research, nature of the problem that a researcher is going to tackle, is working upon, that determines the selection of the type of the data, whether primary data or secondary data. I hope it is clear. But now recently some studies are being done in which both kind of data is being utilized. So when we have such kind of problem, we can have that also. So whether the researcher has to work upon secondary data or primary data is to be decided by the nature of the problem, by that the researcher is working upon. So the data is readily available, collected and put to various kinds of analysis. That is the secondary data. And of course, if there is some primary data which was gathered by the researcher to study his own problem, and some other person wants to use it, it becomes secondary for him, because it was originally collected by some other for his or her own research problem, and if somebody wants to adopt that, of course with the permission of the author, then the data becomes secondary for him or her, for the researcher. We have this table where the primary and secondary data is compared. We have the criteria and primary data and the secondary data. But we find that as far as the source is concerned, the primary data is collected first hand by the researcher and the secondary data is collected by others. As far as purpose is concerned, as it is specific to current research requirements or needs, whereas in secondary data it may have different original purposes. Cost: the primary data is very expensive, whereas secondary data is often less expensive. In fact, we can get free data from the government. All the ministries publish data, they are free. In fact, these are uploaded online also, and free we can gather data from there. We have data from UN sources which are free. However, there are certain secondary data which are not free, and even they are very reputed organization to collect the data within the country and abroad. Abroad also there are various organizations if we want to collect secondary data produced by them, we have to pay them. And inside the country also, there are some very reputed organizations like the CMIE. They collect very reputed data, but we have to pay them. Or the university or the institution has to purchase this data from these organizations at a cost to be used by their researchers. But normally the secondary data is less expensive. Control: in primary data, there is full control over the collection process, whereas there is no control over the collection process in the secondary data. In accuracy, generally, the primary data is more accurate for the specific requirements, whereas the secondary data may be accurate for a specific requirements but can vary. Freshness: the primary data is up to date, whereas the secondary data may be outdated. So, example, a researcher wants to study the eating habits of college students. They create a survey, distribute it to 500 students on campus, asking about daily choices, meal times and snacking habits. Or suppose we want to study the satisfaction level of students from teaching at a college or at a university, then also we have to collect the primary data. Whereas in secondary data, a researcher studying trends in population growth uses census data collected by the government over the past 50 years rather than conducting their own population count. Or if a researcher is studying trends in India's trade, then also he has to go to the data supplied by Ministry of Commerce for any period of time that his research is related to. So, that way we have distinguished the primary and secondary data. We will quickly cover the other type of the data also. The next that we discuss is the time series data. Time series data is collected consistently, allowing researchers to analyze trends and patterns over time. This data helps study trends, seasonality and forecasting, but often requires extensive data processing to address time-based correlations and irregularities. Here we discuss in the table the maximum temperature, humidity and wind, all three behaviors. In New York City, it is single entity collected on the first day of every year, multiple intervals of time. So, what is the characteristics of the time series data? Once it is data about one single entity collected over multiple intervals of time. Like here we see the single entity is the city New York, and we have the annual data here. Data could be quarterly also, data could be monthly also, data could be weekly also. It depends upon the researcher what type of data he requires to study. So, one should make clear that time series data are those data in which there is single entity and multiple intervals of time. This is the characteristics of this type of data. I hope, I wish it is clear to you. Then we have the cross-sectional data. What is cross-sectional data? It is collected simultaneously, providing a snapshot of variables across different units, such as individuals, firms, or countries. This data helps compare differences across subjects simultaneously, but does not offer insight into changes over time. So, here what is there? The entity is multiple, but time is period is one. In the earlier time series data, in the earlier time series data, we had single entity but multiple intervals of time. But here in the cross-sectional data, we have the multiple entities like New York, Boston, Chicago cities, but the time period is only one. There is no multiple interval of time. We observe that this all data is for 1st January. The dates are same for these data, and the entities are different. And then the humidity, wind, or maximum temperature is given. So, this is the cross-sectional data. One must be very clear about it, that in time series data, we have one entity with different or multiple intervals of time, whereas in cross-sectional data, we have multiple entities, but there is only no multiple interval of time, but there is only single time period. That is the difference between the two. Now we come to discuss the next, that is panel data. The panel data or the longitudinal data is collected from the same subjects repeatedly, combining aspects of time series and the cross-sectional data. Panel data is powerful for studying changes over time and individual differences simultaneously, though it can be complex to analyze due to repeated measurement and potential missing data. But anyway, we should know the difference. What is that? Combining of the time series and cross-sectional data. There in the time series data, we had single entities with different time periods, and in cross-sectional data, we had different entities with one time period. Combine these two, and then in this panel data, we have multiple entities and multiple time periods. Again, time periods could be monthly, weekly, or annually. Here in this example, it is annual for 3 years, and it gives data for the temperature, humidity, and wind data for these 3 years for different cities. So, we must be very clear about what is the time series data, what is the cross-sectional data, and what is the panel data. Although these are very easy concepts, but if these concepts are not clear to us, then of course we will become perplexed. So, I hope the difference between time series data and the cross-sectional data and the panel data is clear to all of us. Now we proceed quickly to the qualitative data. The qualitative data is a non-numerical and provides descriptive information, often capturing subjective or contextual insights. Examples include interview transcripts, open-ended survey responses, field notes, and videos. This data is rich in detail and captures the depth and complexity of social phenomena, though it requires interpretive analysis, which can be subjective and challenging to generalize. Quantitative data, what is that? Quantitative data is numerical and can be quantified and analyzed statistically. Examples include income levels, age, years of education, and standardized test scores. Quantitative data allows for objective measurement and statistical testing, though it may overlook nuances and context if used alone. This here we have the table giving the different types of data. Here it is given that there are two types of data as far as the qualitative and quantitative is concerned. The qualitative data and the quantitative data. The qualitative data is further divided into nominal data and ordinal data, and the quantitative data is further subdivided into discrete data and continuous data. What is those? First, qualitative data. It is, of course, the data which gives the data in terms of qualitative values, whereas quantitative data which gives us the information in quantitative values. It is clear. So, the qualitative data we have subdivided it, or it has been subdivided into nominal data and ordinal data. Nominal data which in fact gives us information in categories, male, female, graduate, non-graduate. This kind of data is called the nominal data. Citizens, non-citizens. This is nominal data. Whereas the ordinal data, it ranks, it gives the ranking whether commodity A is preferred to commodity B and commodity B is preferred to commodity C and so on. It's like that. We get the ranking of the data, ranking. So, we do not get a specific quantitative values in qualitative data. In qualitative data, we get either the nominal ones giving information about different categories, or the ordinal data giving us ranking about the choices or ranking about the preferences. I hope it is clear. Now, the quantitative data is one which gives us the value in quantitative terms. There are two subtypes of it is subdivided into discrete data and the continuous data. What is discrete? Which can be given into full digits, integers. like number of trees. Either there would be 100 tree or 101 tree. There cannot be 100.5 tree. That is the discrete data. Or the siblings. Either there could be 2 siblings or 3 siblings. There cannot be 2.5 siblings. This is the discrete data, which cannot be expressed in decimals. Whereas continuous data is the one data which can be expressed in decimals. It is quantitative data. The discrete data is also quantitative, but the discrete data cannot be expressed in decimal terms, whereas continuous data can be expressed in decimal terms. Income, height, length, all these can be expressed in continuous, in decimal terms. So, I am sure I have been clear, I have been able to clear the concepts of all our students about the data and different types of data. Thank you very much.